Pan-African passport and a borderless Africa has dominated headlines across the globe over the past few weeks. Now the question stands, what is it? Who can use it? And more importantly, how does it work? I'm Isabel Masazera, your host on Primetime Live. And tonight, I do have two gentlemen that will be joining me to discuss the rewards and the risks involved with the African passport. Thank you for coming, gentlemen. I do have Mr. Charles Anyama. He is a senior lecturer at Mount Kenya University. Thank you for coming. And I also do have Mr. Rama Isibo. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm a huge fan of your blogs, and you are also a social commentator. Well, this has been making headlines, of course, across Africa and everywhere in the world. But what do you think of the Pan-African passport? Is this a good move?
Absolutely, it's a good move because what we are going to need in the future is free movement of goods, people, and capital. So far we want movement of goods. You deal with that through infrastructure, building railways, roads. You need free movement of capital, which means bringing our banking sectors and everything together. The most important aspect is people, because economies move by people moving around.
But aren't we doing well so far?
Yes, we're doing well so far, but there are, for us to be truly African, for us to have intra-African trade, we are going to have a lot more movement of people, and because people move goods, people move services. So for now, I would say it's a good thing, but how we implement it is going to be very complex. But at least I'm happy with the East African community, the way we've done it, at least Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda. Okay,
I'm glad you brought up the East African community, but before I ask about that, what do you mean by implementation? You precisely said it will depend on how we implement it. What do you think we should do right?
Well, it's all about sharing information in this day and age, because right now our IDs and everything, they're just databases. Your ID card and your passport is not valid unless it corresponds with a database. Someone can tap in and they find that. So until countries cooperate with their databases and we give a whole voter roll, all our list of citizens, all our identifications and passport, so we can all verify each other's identity, then you'll start to see borders going down, because we all become like an internalized country. Like you don't need an ID, you don't need a passport to go from here to Ramagana or to Rusizi, because we're all under the same umbrella. Bringing us all together under the same umbrella will be very important.
Mr. Charles, is this achievable?
Yeah, it is. You know, to every step, every dream, there must be a beginning.
Okay.
So, I'll take this fundamental beginning to the dreams which are put in place, which are dreamt about by the founding fathers of Pan-Africanism quite many years ago. So we are seeing that beside the Pan-Africanism, as my colleague has stated, we have the East African community already in place. You know, the two organizations coming in place, they enrich one another. East Africa enrich Pan-Africanism, that is the AU. AU enriches East Africa. So,
Mr. Charles.
Yes, please.
When you talk of the East African community, we already have a problem implementing seamless borders in East Africa alone. Some of the countries were not that comfortable coming on board, and it took quite some time to get everyone together. Don't you think when you talk of 54 countries, this might be maybe a little too ambitious?
The ambitious element might be there. That is quite true. You know, ambitious plans also require programs require ambitious plan. It might take a lot of resources. it might take also a lot of planning from various countries. You know, each country have its tradition. So the moment we begin seeing success factor in some of the countries, others will be able to emulate. I think the biggest aspect here is cooperation and understanding and commitment, a value that which will be shared by all the countries in Africa. It's achievable.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, diplomacy is your area.
Yeah.
How easy is it to get all countries involved?
Yeah, first of all, let me mention one thing. The Pan-Africanism passport was launched in a country with a lot of commitment, a leadership with a commitment. The way it has already started here, I think it has set a strong benchmark to mobilize other countries to emulate, you know, to accept the idea of Pan-Africanism. It's my first time to see Pan-Africa, the AU having such a stronger commitment. I'm seeing there's a clear hope that with the political will in each country, it is achievable.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, you can join the conversation on Twitter. You can tweet me at Isabel, that is ISABEL Masozera, or you can join us using RBA Rwanda on Twitter. Give us your comments, give us your questions, and you can join the dialogue. Back to you, Mr. Rama. Now, I've heard rumors, and of course critics have come up to say that maybe this passport might be acquired by the wealthy, the rich. Are these baseless rumors? Now, we saw the first two people to receive this passport were the president of Rwanda and the African Union chairperson. But the third person rumored to be in line to receive this passport is Nigeria's Aliko Dangote. What do you have to say about this?
Well, this always benefits the richest. But the first thing they started with was giving it to all government officials in Africa. That's who they're starting with. And that's primarily because governments have got to cooperate with each other. It will make it a lot easier for governments to just fly. Because, they already have diplomatic passports, so I don't know what the difference is. I hear you,
but I don't think Aliko Dangote is a president or a government official at that.
Yeah, he's not, but then he is he's an economic president.
What do you have to say about that,
He walks around with
Mr.
20 billion worth of cash to invest.
Still, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, let's start first thing. What is the purpose of giving this purpose? I think the purpose is one of which we can speak about is to enhance easy travel. Easy travel. And for this travel also at its purpose. One will travel to get acquainted with the information in a country or for purposes of trade. And this trade has its value, not only for that person who travels. 10 of us may get the passport, but we will not travel at the same time to the same countries. So the opportunity of a person will not be only for him or for herself. A person involve himself in a trade with other country will make also others benefit. So to me, I greatly accept the idea of even giving it to the few. Gradually, it will roll to others as well.
Well, the dream is to have every African have that passport by 2018. Yeah. Is this achievable?
No. No.
Why do you say so?
Because it involves so many things. It's not as simple as printing passports. Like I said, this is about databases. This is about data protection, about access to data, and all of that. The fact is, most African countries, we are suspicious of each other. We have been brought up like that colonially, to always suspect the next nation, either of harboring terrorists or harboring opposition or people not favorable to government. So we don't have a long history of cooperating with each other. that we could suddenly just wake up and drop our guard.
But then don't you think that that is not an achievable target when you say 2018, and that is our goal?
2 years,
Yeah.
that is no. Especially the way things work in Africa, maybe Rwanda, but for Africa, the pace of work in Africa, 2 years is like 10 minutes. And to assume that you could do something. But of course, to maintain this momentum, they had to set a very fast ultimatum, which is almost unrealistic. Because if they had said 2030, governments will forget about it until 2029.
So you think that the 2018 is just to build momentum and get presidents moving faster?
Yes, it's to build momentum, because there's no realistic way that you could do that. Because like we said, there are so many things. It means pulling, like one of the reasons we saw immediately after the AU, we had the Chief of Intelligence and Security Services meeting in Kigali. Now that was more important than the actual AU summit in bringing forward this thing, because these are the people that actually implement this, the intelligence and the security services.
Sure.
One, they have to get to know each other, to trust each other.
Yes.
People who have always been spying on each other, to suddenly get them to
Well,
like
you certainly raise an important issue right there. But Mr. Charles, if I may ask, what is your take on this? Because I'm led to believe it is actually achievable. We have 13 out of the 54 countries in Africa already having either a borderless issue or going on, or sometimes, you know, you don't necessarily need a visa if you're from Africa, like the Seychelles. So maybe this is achievable. What do you have to say about this? 2018 possible or not?
To large extent, it's not. The time dimension given is too small. There's a need to do a thorough groundwork. You find at the top, at the governmental level, people already aware about the passport. But you go deep in other areas, in the other towns, even in the country, many people are not aware about it.
Would you say with the sensitization, it is possible? And then how long do you think would be practical?
The awareness may not be the sole instrument to make it possible. You know, to get this passport rolling, it requires a lot of resources, financial resources. Not only that, even human resources to ensure that it is accommodated within this short time dimension. So, and we may speak of 2020 or 2021. There, I can predict could be possible. Given the fact that a number of people, like in Rwanda or the neighboring countries, have already got passport or identity cards, I think tracking their information to produce a passport will not be quite costly. Yeah.
So, Mr. Rama, what do you think is the upside of us actually implementing the Pan-African passport?
The upside, if it works, it is. But for it to work, like when you look at a region like Europe, and you ask how did 26 countries or which are in that agreement, how did they manage to do it? It wasn't done in one go. There was the Benelux countries, they did it among themselves, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. Then France and Germany joined them. Then the Iberian countries were doing their own arrangement with Italy. Then they all verified their IDs and then came together. Then they kept bringing in other people. But the most important thing is trust. The fact is that in most African countries, many African countries, you can buy an ID in whatever name you want. Recently, there was an attack on the Westgate Center in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya. And there was an investigative journalist who thought, let me go to the immigration office and ask for passports with the pictures and the names of the terrorists involved. He was just quoted 1 million Kenya shillings together. You know, can you imagine when you have people within security services who are willing and ready to benefit from destroying their own country?
But then that also brings me to the question, how are we going to protect our own if we are already failing when we have passports as nations? How are we going to be able to control the whole of Africa?
Like I said, it will have to be done in blocks, because I don't see, because the fact is most Rwandans, we think regionally. I mean, the actual number of Rwandans who want to go to Nigeria or Cameroon or Egypt is fewer than the ones who want to go to Uganda, Kenya. You want more likely to go to one of the regional...
We are already having regional blocks failing, just here in East Africa alone.
Yeah.
If you have all borders open, how are you going to succeed on a bigger level if you're already failing to
You have to have intelligence. That's why at first when the Schengen was working, the intelligence services had everything under control.
And do we have everything under control?
New threats like ISIS and you know, the terrorist threats that they're facing, they didn't envision them when they first thought of the Schengen visa. They didn't think that freedom of movement means freedom of movement for bankers, also for terrorists. So even the Europeans are now debating whether it was a good idea or how they can tweak it to change it, because freedom of movement, it has its own problems. It speeds up. It accelerates some very bad...
Let me direct the same question back to you, because critics have come out to point out some threats. Opening borders to smugglers, to sex traffickers, you're talking of terrorists as well. So what are the security measures that you think will successfully help us in this situation?
Thank you. I think in the previous question, we said that the time lag given to enforce this passport in the region is too small. We gave a number of reasons. One of the reasons I can underline is preparation to ensure security measures are in place. And these security measures can quite easily be achieved when there is increased cooperation in sharing information. The other issue is, let's take the case of Rwanda. The passports to the Rwandan citizens, the African passport to the Rwandan citizens, will not be given by another country. It will be given by Rwanda, by the country. It will be given to people who are well known to the leadership in the country. So I think that's one of the ways that will help to eliminate cases of giving it into wrongful hand. Coming back to the issue of security, it requires a lot of investment in time, in personnel, and also in finance.
You raised time as an investment. Now we're talking 2 years to achieve this. Is that realistic?
That's why I suggest 2 years is unrealistic. We can speak of 2020, 2021, making it a bit more realistic. Perhaps the 2 years up to 2018 could be preparatory ground. Not only that, but perhaps giving the passport to a number of people as we fast track also giving it to others by the year 2021 or 2020. Yeah.
Okay, now let's talk Africa's economy. Now some people believe that this is going to accelerate development, further development in Africa, but some believe that this might actually go on the downside of it. We think the easiest thing that comes to mind is increase in trade and further integration and all the things that work for Africa. But then you're talking of fighting for jobs for the smaller countries, because now you have open borders and people who are more skilled freely coming into these smaller countries. How is that going to play out? Aren't we having more harm than good in this situation?
We have seen this in the East African community, where Rwanda has been one of the most open in terms of letting other East African citizens to come and work here and live here. But that's because we had a very high skills shortage, and most Rwandans, skilled Rwandans, can still find work. Maybe not the perfect job, but you can still find work. But other countries, especially Tanzania, they've been very much against it because they felt that they were going to lose
And
out.
they're not just against it for the sake of speaking out. We had issues with South Africa recently, where those that are unemployed were forced to riot and speak out in more violent ways because the more skilled people are coming into the country and taking up their jobs.
Yeah. But this is the most important thing, is sensitizing people and making people invest in this project and making people believe that they have some kind of stake in it. You see, the problem which a lot of these leaders, especially like when you look at Brexit in Europe, they see the big picture. The big picture, more jobs, more money, more everything. But in the small, but part of that big picture, when a little guy looks in there, he says, I'm not in that picture. Where am I in that picture?
And that
and they
small
say,
person
you're there
is
on the
very
left
key.
in the corner there. And the person says, no. But then in a big picture, for example, if you gave us a policy where 66% of Rwandans were going to benefit tremendously, 33% are going to suffer tremendously. Now, that's you take that. You'd rather lift those 66%.
Well,
but then those 33 are the ones who are going to cause you a lot more problems.
I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Charles, a little bit there. Yes, in every situation there's harm and then there's the upside. But in this particular case, we need everybody involved if we're going to achieve this dream, One Africa. Very beautiful and achievable. But if I am somebody down in the village and I'm thinking about this, I produce goods and I need to export them and all of this, and there's somebody who is more skilled coming into the country to provide a better service. Yet I still need to go and apply for this passport. How are we going to get everybody involved if this affects them negatively to some extent?
I think the issue to do with the employment, for example, it relates back to policy issues. It is a policy issue. As my colleague was saying, I agree with that. A policy may suggest that a number of positions have to be reserved to nationals. Take the example of Europe. There are certain jobs which requires highly skilled people, and such people are lacking in Europe. Such people are got in India, they are got in China and elsewhere. There are low-skilled jobs. Such people cannot be got in Europe, they are got elsewhere, in Africa, in Nigeria, and so forth. So the issue is policy issue to protect the local skills so that they are not totally deprived. Still, I will say that, as my colleagues was suggesting, you find in a country at a given time, certain jobs may not be filled by the existing skill, may be filled by outside people. This one I could take as a source of empowerment to such a country. With the time, with the strong empowerment put in place, such nationals may even leave the job for a particular country.
Now, we're still with you on policies. Well, some countries are considering that derogatory policies and some of these things, but some, like Burundi, are pulling out. What do you have to say about that?
The Burundi situation, I think, will be understood from various dimensions. If you take the historical crisis in which they are, in fact, the crisis in which they are, it characterizes the way they think. You see that? It influences their thinking. It influences a lot of suspicion.
But what about Tanzania? Because Tanzania is also coming out to say no.
Some of the things might be rooted.
That's from their socialism days.
In fact, that's what I wanted to say.
They've always been suspicious.
It's rooted back to colonial background. You know,
yes,
the colonial
but I still want to pick on what you just said there, Mr. Rama. You said suspicion?
Yeah, going back to the Ujamaa days of Nyerere, where he kind of cut them off the global economy. He said we're going to try a new type of economics, which is more socialist based, which is more communal, collectively owned. And it was in opposition to Kenya, which was the capitalist haven of all Western investment in the region. So Nyerere taught the people to value themselves and to value their Kiswahili and to value their culture and to be suspicious of outsiders bringing their strange ways.
I still believe that mindset is still fast spread in Africa.
Yes.
Most people are proud to be Rwandan. I'm proud to be Kenyan.
Because most
I like to carry that identity.
Most, apart from Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, and Lesotho, all countries in Africa are a Western creation. There are very few countries which can point to themselves being a country before colonization. So in the post-colonial era, when you have so many tribes which have been put together, which were only held together by violence and bribery and various other things. In the 60s, we had to have this nationalist nation building. Every country had one, even Kenyatta.
Mr. Rama, please hold that thought. We'll be back and get a little deeper into suspicion and what we can do about that. Well, thank you so much for watching Primetime Live. I'm Isabel Masozera. Join us on Twitter at Isabel Masozera or at RBA Rwanda. Join the conversation. So much for you to enjoy. We'll be right back. Back to Primetime Live. I'm Isabel Masozera, and tonight we talk about the Pan-African passport and the possibility of a borderless Africa. Now, joining me and taking this conversation a little bit deeper, I have with me Mr. Charles Anyama and still with Mr. Rama Isibo. Before we went for the break, we were talking about suspicion and how some African countries are proud to be independent and carry their identity as a flag of pride. What are we going to do to make everybody comfortable with the idea of one passport? Now, a question. For some African countries, especially the smaller countries, fees for visas, that's something that can bring in income, and that would be taking that away, and a few other requirements that help the countries generate income. Don't you think that maybe there's a way that this can be dealt with where we still retain income coming into these embassies per se, and not just a situation where we're taking away income instead of bringing in income with the idea of furthering development in Africa?
Yeah, I was talking to my friend today about why he was in he's in Istanbul and it cost $50 to get to Berlin, and then they were saying Entebbe to Kigali is $300 or something. Yes, and we were saying why, like, I mean, the distance from Istanbul to Berlin is 3-4 times the distance, and yet it's cheaper. And then you ask yourself, why do we charge so much? Like, if you fly to Entebbe, probably a third of your ticket or more, maybe half of it is going to be airport taxes. And those are revenue streams for the government.
That's very true.
And so when you look at Europe and how they managed to get their low-cost airlines really working, which is what eventually helped to make the borderless travel more economically viable, because it went from 10% of Europeans traveling to 40, 50% of Europeans travel every year. So when we look at us, we have to become like them. We have to have like NATO. They're under NATO, where they have the same. Until the day when you have Rwanda's Air Force patrolling Ugandan and Kenyan, Tanzanian airspace.
That's where we're headed, I believe.
That's where we're headed.
Yes.
When you all treat it like one internal market, then the governments will reduce those. They'll remove those taxation fees when they see, and they, instead of taxing per seat, you tax per plane.
Okay.
You see, now we tax per seat. In Europe, they say we just want $5,000 for the whole plane.
Okay.
How you package it beneath that's up to you.
Still talking about the issue of economic growth. I still feel like in this situation, one of the things that the African Union is trying to do is further development. Yes. But I see that we have more issues to worry about now. When you speak of the competition for jobs. Now, I talked about smaller countries, but this is also going to spill over to the more developed countries, where the competition is so high that you have to resort to even bringing in people that are better, because the competition keeps growing. Where does that leave Africans?
It's a globalized world.
That's not a good enough answer. We are trying to achieve a better Africa.
That leaves us the same as everyone else in this world.
But I believe we need to mitigate the downside to the African passport if we're going to realize the One Africa dream. Coming back to you, diplomacy. Now, when it comes to crossing over into these countries, some of these different measures put in place and restrictions and the things you have to go through to access a passport on a local level are going to be useless. How are we going to avoid terrorists crossing into these countries? And I keep bringing this back because it's the biggest risk we have. Smugglers, every wrong character that we could potentially have stopped from crossing over into the country, they can just wave the African flag as the passport and walk into the country.
In the border points, at the border points, it is good to promote vigilance. The security personnel have to be so vigilant with what is happening. Leave along that. This aspect cannot be left only in the hands of security personnel.
Yes.
It requires not only them, it requires also the local community, the civilians, who should take some instrumental role. Perhaps the equipment, security equipments, which we still have to advance and put at the border point to ensure that there are proper screening. So screening could serve as a fundamental role to ensure that terrorists at least are wiped out. Leave along the fact at the border point of putting screening. Within given countries, strong security policies will make it almost impossible or quite difficult for terrorists to carry out their activities, to have plans. It will become a little bit quite easier to wipe them out with a strong security policy in a country. It's not only a policy being put in place, but enforcement, implementation is the key.
Now we have some countries that are struggling to strengthen the refugee and the refugee controls. You have borders that are now open and situations across Africa where some countries are affected by war. And if people can freely walk into any nation without restriction, how then are these countries going to be able to afford this situation without preparing for it in advance?
The issue, you mean the issue of refugee?
Yes.
The issue of refugee.
Yes.
I think concerning refugees, these countries in Africa have quite a long had history related to that. Any time any country can produce refugee, and any time countries are ready to receive them with some challenges that are given. I think African countries have built up a strong solidarity as an instrument to ensure that whoever comes as a refugee is helped.
Okay, Mr. Rama, how much sovereignty do you think these African countries are willing to yield to if this refugee policy is going to work? Because now when you are opening borders, that means you're allowing anybody to walk in.
Going back to terrorism, I mean, all of the major terrorists who have committed crimes in Europe within the last year or so, the Belgium attacks, the France attacks, all of them were known to the security services, all of them. There was not a single surprise which ever came up. They were all known, they were all being tracked. Most of them had gone to travel, most of them in their passport was stamped going to fight for ISIS. You know, most of them had spent a couple years in Iraq. They had become indoctrinated and they came back. They were all well known to the security agencies, every single one of them. But none of them did anything. You know, they were indecisive, human rights, whatever reasons, they didn't do it. So weak implementation and lack of will is the real problem there, not necessarily.
But how can it be addressed?
But then it could work the other way. This could reduce the suspicion and the fighting between African countries that leads to those refugees. When you have, say, Southern Sudan right now is pumping out refugees, but Uganda is meddling, Northern Sudan is meddling, Kenya is meddling. So, and then they complain when all the people run away and they come to you. So maybe like Europe, when they started trusting each other, they stopped fighting each other, which meant fewer refugees among each other, which meant more peace. So what it is could break the vicious cycle. But then refugees will come regardless of whether the border is open or not. If they're fearing something worse.
That's true. Gentlemen, let's talk about the implementation of the African passport. What exactly is needed, is required? Walk me through the entire process.
Many things are needed. As we had outlined a number of them before, political will is one of the strongest elements. The political will enable resource mobilization that will help to process these passports. The political will also help to create a strong awareness to enable people to accept the passport as a valuable resource for the region. So such commitment at the political level should be shared with all stakeholders. That will help at least the process of implementation.
So let's assume all African countries are willing to work together. What next?
If all African countries are willing to work together, I think now the next step is to promote the usage of of the passport. As my colleague stated, you see the passport brings a lot of values.
Let's pause right there. Let's take you back just a little bit. There are some countries per se that are willing to come on board, but don't have what it takes, the infrastructure, everything that is needed in the process. What happens? Will there be help given to the smaller countries to facilitate the implementation?
Exactly. That's why you'll find the implementation may not take the same time. The issue of Pan-Africanism is to enhance cooperation. The countries which have inability, certain given level of inability, can be supported through cooperation. Maybe what requires finance, or what requires infrastructure, or what requires human resource, they may be supported.
A question. So let's say, everybody is on board, all countries are on board, and the people are willing to get this passport. Does that mean that my local passport is not valid anymore? Do I put that away and get a new passport? And what's the process?
No, like I was saying earlier, this requires a huge database of almost 1 billion people.
Yes.
I don't think such a database even exists yet. Maybe Facebook, but that's so huge, and it has to have its own servers, which are the size of a whole neighborhood just to operate. So yeah, this will need a huge database. It will need an Afripol, African police, like the way Europol and Interpol, to make police, intelligence, crime preventers, all of them to be linked into one system.
Yes.
To need border police from all over Africa to be linked to one system. It will need the passport, it will need verification, it will need all those anti-fraud and anti-counterfeit measures. It needs, there's so many things. But we already have the infrastructure in place. Each country has its own passport and ID service. Therefore, it's about
we
linking.
have something to use.
Yeah, we have.
All right.
Yeah.
Now you can join the conversation on Twitter. Remember to tweet me at Isabel Masozera, or you can as well reach us using RBA Rwanda. Is there something you want us to talk about concerning this particular topic? Do you have a comment or a question? We'll be able to get to that shortly. Well, let's talk about what this means long term. If you were to look at it in terms of percentages, would you say the rewards outweigh the downside of us getting the African passport?
The rewards, you see right now, we can't even look at the rewards yet because we are trying to just solve a problem which is holding us back. So if we remove that stone around our neck, maybe. But right now, our economies are too similar to really get synergies and to get real good advantages out of it.
But don't you think this will help that? Because once you have the same people doing the same thing. We will need to start
diversifying.
But this is a step towards diversifying, because if you're producing the same thing and he's producing the same thing, sooner or later you realize I need to go a different direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But as long as you're in your little country, you don't know that Uganda also produces coffee and tea, and Kenya produces coffee and tea and has some tourism. Tanzania does coffee and tea and tourism with some minerals. So we have to start diversifying. But you only diversify when you see what's out there. We have been building a model internally and we didn't know it's just being replicated all over the continent, to the point that it's very hard for an African business person to travel and really spot gaps unless you go to a very different nation.
So let me get this. You think that by having the African passport and opening up the borders, it will help with diversifying our economies?
Yeah, it will open up our minds, it will open up our ideas, and then we'll see the gaps that we are missing.
Yes.
Because you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
I think adding to what he's saying, the reward will be more than the disreward, I'll say like this. Yeah, it gives a bigger opportunity. Let's take, for example, Rwanda. There are things Rwanda may not be able to get from the 3 or 5 East African countries, but may get it in other countries within the bloc.
Yes.
There are investors who may not be found easily in the 5 East African countries. They may be in other countries. They may come and put industries, factories, and so forth in place. There are tourists who may not travel from the neighboring countries, but they may travel from other countries to Rwanda. So the scope of the opportunity in this way will expand drastically.
What is the cost of this African passport?
Come again?
The cost of the African passport.
Yeah. To others,
yes.
Although, as you mentioned, to others, the revenue that embassies may get may dwindle, but I think that will be solved by the expanded, the bigger scope of revenue that may come perhaps through trade or through communication or through travel.
I think that is obvious. We will get increase in trade,
revenue.
But I'm talking about the ordinary African trying to get themselves a copy of the African passport. Do we have an estimate of how much it would cost? Is there a cost, or is this something free for every person?
I don't know specifically how much it's going to cost.
Yes.
But I assume that if it's Dangote is getting one, it's not cheap. I mean, the first round, that's why it's for government officials, you know. But then those government officials have diplomatic passports anyway, which would have let them walk into any African country. So I don't think they were the target or the immediate. But you see, the government officials are the ones who have to get on board.
Yes.
In order for it to be implemented.
Speaking of getting on board,
implement it behind their back.
Well, let's talk about the willpower for the presidents. Some of them are willing to come on board, but some of the other presidents might be hesitant. And of course, with the policies and all that it takes to get them on board, how is this going to play out? What do you think it's going to take to get everybody on board? Do you think we have enough willpower?
Like most of our leaders in Africa think about number one, think about themselves. They're not thinking about long-term strategy for their nation. And in fact, they see the outside, even their African neighbors, as a big threat to themselves.
Yes.
But there's going to be a multi-speed approach to this. Some countries will adopt it very quickly. And maybe if they adopt it and then they have advantages among themselves, then the other nations will all jump on board. But I think this is something that's very popular among Africans, because Africans, if we had money, we would want to travel all over Africa, because it's something that we only see on TV. So there is an absolute, but there are people already do this.
Yes.
People already traveling, just that you have to pay bribes at the border. Some guy told me how he went from here to Zimbabwe without a passport. Just, you know, he just had $10,000 in his pocket.
Yes.
Every border he got to, he removed like $200, $300, $400.
Some people believe it is possible for us to not have to go all the way and get the African passport, but maybe just not have to have visas per se to cross over to any African country. Do you think this is a better approach?
Yeah, not having visas, now this becomes another problem of verification. When you have so many countries in Africa which can sell you an ID, which can sell you a passport, suddenly introducing visa-free transport, you'll get a lot of Nigerian princes coming to Rwanda, whose uncle has left them millions of dollars, and you just need to, you see. So it's better to verify people's identity than say this person can travel freely.
Wouldn't you
Otherwise,
say?
if you don't, if you say everyone free for all, you don't need to verify.
Yes.
Like in Rwanda, they had to recently arrest a lot of foreigners because this free visa rule, it attracted some of the worst people in Africa. Because they were like, hey, Rwanda is free. We can make this our
Mr. Rama, I believe critics do have a valid point when they say it's even worse when you have one passport for everybody, because then it's almost the same thing, except verification is even harder.
Yeah, but then this is why our intelligence and security organs have to be connected.
Let me direct this to you.
And to be less corrupt.
What do you think?
And to understand that.
Yeah,
visa free, or would you say the African passport is better?
Visa free African passport. Yeah, to have the African passport in place is more credible.
Okay.
It helps to serve to verify each other person's
Wouldn't you
identity
say that
country.
maybe starting with a visa-less approach might be faster and will help ease our minds and help with the mindsets so we can work towards the African passport. Given the period of time we have, 2 years, wouldn't we start smaller and say, okay, you can access any African country without a visa as we work towards the African passport?
Obtaining the passport.
Yes.
Yeah, it gives a quick opportunity, that's right, to have the free access to the visa or visa traveling without the passport. And it encourages those who have an opportunity perhaps to cross to the neighboring countries to invest and do some business. It helps them, it facilitates them, it quickens the process. And also it builds a kind of tradition of promoting, acquiring the African passport with time.
Well, we've talked about the African passport for quite some time, but given the 2063 vision, well, to have an integration for Africa, we've had the talk about political federation.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? Is this achievable? Do you think that the African passport is one of those steps towards achieving that?
Well, personally, like I lived in UK for 16 years and I was always against the EU in principle because it was taking away sovereignty, it was taking away, you know, people's rights on the ground while giving wider more. So and it was keeping out Africans, it was keeping out African products, it was keeping out our goods, our trade, everything. So I never, I mean, a bloc like EU that is so exclusionary, it can be very bad. But I don't think it will ever be possible to have an African bloc, because this is the biggest continent. I don't know how many million square, 20-something million square kilometers.
We were able to, we've watched the European Union, and one would say Europe would have even been harder to integrate. Don't you think that there's hope?
No, because Europe at the time, they had fought a war, and the main point was, let's not ever fight a war again. It wasn't necessarily about economic. They knew we need economic development so we can, our citizens can be calm enough to not have crazy political parties. Are you
saying we don't have reason enough to believe
we don't have
Africa?
The impetus. We don't have the impetus like we did at that time.
Okay.
You know, if Africa had been bombed and Africa was on zero and we had nothing.
Hopefully we don't get to that.
Then maybe we could all pull our hands together but then right now what we have is not enough to solve our problems and not enough to, you know.
Well, let me pick your brain on
yes,
that.
I may not agree with him. I think in the 21st century, to have a life and a journey of hope could help us move to that direction. It will take a lot of sacrifices within countries. It may appear as if there is loss of national sovereignty, but it's not. It is to promote an aspect of a win-win relation between an African country and the bloc as it is. So the journey has started. It may not take a lot of sacrifices. It requires commitment. It requires generations and generations. So the foundation is now. It can be set, and you can arrive there.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me tonight. Well, that's all the time we had for you on Primetime Live tonight. Isabel Masazera is my name. Make a date with me next time.